over to
Thank you very much. No, I just came back from a trip in South Africa, Angola, Burundi, Uganda, Kenya, and almost Somalia, but I'll mention that later. But what I really wanted to talk about this morning was Somalia, because there's an awfully lot of the trip was really based on Somalia and the discussion. One thing I think that's important when anytime we talk about Somalia, and it was mentioned to me when I was out talking with the country team, that about probably more than half the population of Somalia is under 18. Anybody in Somalia that is 18 or under has never lived in a country that is not in chaos. And I think it's important in reminding ourselves repeatedly why it's so critical that that our effort there has to succeed as we keep working on it, and we have to give the people there a real chance. You've heard me briefing many times on Somalia, where I talk about the absolute feeling of the Secretary General a couple of years ago that when he raised Somalia, people tried to change the subject. They didn't want to talk about Somalia. I think that those of you that were around to the Security Council about a couple of weeks ago, maybe 3 by now, were very much aware of the unanimity at that council meeting, how people felt that there was a strong strategy in place to deal with Somalia. Nobody obviously wants to sound overly optimistic about Somalia at any time, but the fact is that the strategy is in place and that it is moving forward. Let me talk a little bit about some of the elements of that, and then I'd be happy to talk about sort of what I heard in talking with people. On this trip, I was planning to go into Somalia on the same morning that they shelled the president's plane, so we got about to the Somali airspace before we turned around and came back, so that didn't work. But that evening, the Prime Minister was in Nairobi, and the next day we had a meeting of the high-level commission on Somalia, which is designed to make sure that Somalis and the international community are working together again under UN auspices. But so I had a lot of discussions with the people that are directly involved, their supporters, the people that are trying to help in Somalia, as well as, of course, the 2 major troop contributors to AMISOM in Burundi and Uganda. I think the most important thing to mention is that the TFG, the transitional government, has certainly been under the new leadership after Sheikh Sharif was elected president, has certainly gone way out of its way in being inclusive and trying to bring people in. Most of the various groups that were in opposition or around have joined into the government. Now, as you know, there were 2 main opposition groups out there fighting in a big way. One is Al-Shabaab. The other one, the other group of extremists has been Hizb al-Islam. There are lots of dissension in the ranks. There's lots of discussions with various groups, and so I think there's been a fairly steady process of seeing that the government is in place and it's moving forward. The second thing that I think is important is that the government has a pretty clear plan of where it wants to go and how it wants to move forward. The staff in our staff in Nairobi at the moment, there's UNPOS there. There is the political office for Somalia, which Charles Petrie is the deputy of. There's UNSOA there, which is the support operation from DFS for AMISOM, and there is the country team, all of which are working together very hard to try to bring together a very positive result. I think that anyone who looks at Somalia would not call the situation there anything but fragile. I think that's a fair statement. But unlike a few months ago when everyone was making dire predictions that the government was going to fall, that it was going to be taken over, I don't think people are making any of that assumption at the moment. There are serious threats to be dealt with. There's no question about that. And it was going to take a very long time to move the process forward. But as you know, we put together, under Ud Abdullah's very able leadership, the Special Representative of the Secretary General, the Djibouti process, which ended up with this quite inclusive government. And I think that political process is moving forward. Now, one of their efforts and one of their problems is to show that they are, in fact, can act as a government. That means that they have the resources that they do take in from the port that they have been using, I think, quite effectively and trying to be very transparent in the use. Everyone knows that Somalia has had something of a bad reputation down through the years as a place where the aid tends to disappear. They've engaged Price Waterhouse to make sure that that doesn't happen in this case, and so I think they're working on it quite hard. We talked with them about their plans for social policies and others as they could move forward. Now, of course, funding is not only their problem, but it is a serious problem. The second one is security. There they are relying on two elements. One is the Amazon forces. And again, the stories on Amazon a year or so ago was how it was all falling apart and how dire the situation was. In fact, Amazon has been doing well recently. The support from the Department of Field Services now that the Security Council set up and established last December is now in effect. It's moving forward. Mr. Jagdishvili is here from the department, so if you ask me any too hard of questions, I'll turn to him for that. But now the Amazon forces are being fed. They're being getting their not military equipment, but the other logistics essentials are coming in at a level that they would come in as a peacekeeping UN peacekeeping operation. And this has had a real effect in the confidence of the forces there. You know that after having the Burundians and the Ugandans having 2 battalions there for a long time, they each now have 3 battalions there. They're talking about putting in a 4th battalion apiece. Others are talking about putting in forces. So you're getting up pretty close to the 8,000. We're not there yet. We're about 5,200, I think, troops on the ground from Amazon. But the process is there that you can see to increase the pattern on the ground. Some of the, I think, stronger attacks against Amazon in recent times have been really designed to try to stop them, to slow them down from this, to try to discourage them. What I found very encouraging myself in talking in both Uganda and Burundi and with the AU people is that you didn't have that kind of level of discouragement that you had some year or so back, that they now really can see a path forward. And so we'll see. We'll see how it goes, but I think they understand that. Also, there's been some, the training is now kicking in on Somali forces, police and military. It's being done in several areas. I think we'll be able to see a lot more of that come through. So I think that the strategy that was put in place, I think, is now being carried out in many levels. We ourselves expect to, Charles and other people from UNPOS have been in Mogadishu very frequently these days, much more frequently than in the past when it was sort of, you couldn't go there. We're increasing the country team and UNPOS increasing their presences in both Puntland and Somaliland, but they're also in Mogadishu being much more on the ground and will in other parts of the country as that process moves forward. I think really sort of the last thing that I would like to say, and as you've heard me talk several times before about funding, about carrying out the money that was pledged in Brussels The pledges have essentially been carried out except for two areas now, just for your information. One is an agreement between the EU and the AU, which is the bulk of the money on support of the Amazon forces. And I'm told that's almost fixed. I mean, they've had some debates on that. A second has been some money that come through us through the UNPOS Trust Fund on support for the Somali forces, and we're also hoping that we're quite close to the resolution of that. I would guess that we will be asking for more money and more assistance in the months ahead. Clearly they're going to need it both for security and also for the social services that the government needs to provide. One of the difficulties in Somalia, of course, is that without the aid and assistance to develop real development aid, then it's very hard for the government to show what it's doing. Humanitarian aid continues at a very high level, and again, what we're trying to do is the very best we can for all of the people out there. With that, let me just leave it there, but I do want to say that overall there is a sense that as the Security Council said 3 weeks ago or whatever, that we've got a strategy, now we need to implement it. The sense is when you're on the ground out there that the implementation is actually in train. It's moving forward. I'm not here to announce any huge and great successes, but you can really see the direction that we're heading at this point, and I think that in itself is somewhat encouraging.